Hello Internet, welcome to another video in my experimental Cataclysm series. Today we're going to be talking about the recent changes to the mutation system in Cataclysm Dark Days Ahead. This is a pretty recent addition to the game and it pretty heavily changed how mutations are obtained. And I'll be doing my best to explain things in this video, but I mean, it's always possible that I gloss over or miss something in a video like this, but that's probably especially true in this one. However, I hope that I cover things adequately. You should, by the end of the episode, have an idea of how this new system works and what it means for you as the player. There will be links to the actual changes in the description down below, and I will not be covering the min-maxy, exact numbers for everything. You can check them out if that's something you want to do. Also, sorry for this video being a bit late. This week was... It was sort of terrible. Anyway, back to mutation stuff. So generally speaking, what did all of this do? The first thing that you're going to notice is that mutations are now gradual rather than instantaneous. Instead of consuming mutagen and instantly mutating, you will instead mutate after a short period of time. The rate at which you mutate is based on how much you've got in your system. In my testing, for instance, if I basically OD on mutagens by taking a ton of them, I found that I would get just a ton of mutations over the course of a day or two. At lower consumption rates, you will not mutate as quickly / get as many mutations. And in order to facilitate this mutation over time, mutagen now has nutrients in the same way that mutant meat provides toxins, just for instance. There are two types of these nutrients. We have flavored nutrients, which are based on the category, and in other words, there's like bird nutrients, bear nutrients, slime nutrients, etc. for each of the mutation categories. And then the other type of nutrient is the generic mutagen nutrient. And these two types of nutrients, they do work a little bit differently. The typed nutrients basically point your genetic code in that specific direction. So if you take bear and bird mutagen, you will get those two types of specific nutrient, which means that when you mutate, you are pointed towards the bear and bird mutation categories. And then the generic mutagen nutrient is what ultimately causes you to mutate. So the typed mutagen nutrients do not actually mutate your character, they point you at a category. Think of it like those types are pointing the gun and then the generic mutagen nutrient pulls the trigger. Does that make sense? So previously in the game, if you were going to mutate, you took one of two types of mutagen. You either took the standard mutagen, which is what you would eat, and then the serums would be the things that you injected, and they were more powerful versions of that base level mutagen. Now this is still true, but there have been some tweaks, so let's just talk about them kind of separately over the course of this video. So base level mutagen that you eat comes in two forms. There is the typed mutagen, and then there is the generic mutagen. Generic mutagen will cause your character to gain generic mutagen nutrient, which again, remember, that's what causes you to mutate, but it doesn't aim you at a specific category. The typed mutagen that you eat contains both the generic and typed mutagen nutrients. And basically what this means is that they give you a low level of the generic mutagen nutrient, which will, kickstart the mutation process, but it also gives you the typed nutrient as well. So it's also pointing you at those specific categories. And these different types of nutrients are actually listed in the item entry. So looking at standard mutagen, it contains the mutagen nutrient at 325%. However, if I look at something like cattle mutagen, it gives us a lower dose of the mutagen nutrient, which again is the thing that makes us mutate. And then it also gives us the cattle mutagen nutrient, which is pointing us towards the cattle mutation tree. Just to pop in here, as the editor, I stated that these mutagens that you eat are enough to cause you to mutate. However, this is not always the case. It will depend on how much of the generic mutagen is in your system overall. This has some randomness to it. It is possible for you to take a hit of mutagen and have it work out of your system before you actually mutate. And again, this is specifically for the mutagen that you eat. We're not talking about the more advanced mutagen. In my testing, I often found that I would get a changing status effect in the character menu to indicate that I was capable of mutating, but I often did not mutate at that stage. This testing was done with one single dose of flavored mutagen, which provides a mutation category nutrient and the generic mutagen nutrient. The nutrient content of any piece of mutagen is enough technically at this stage of development to cause you to mutate. It also drains from your body slowly at a rate of around 1 per hour, but you're not actually guaranteed to get a mutation in that time. It's possible that one dose, especially of flavored mutagen, would not actually lead to any change. Now, higher tier mutagen, which was previously called serums, and we'll talk about that, they've been renamed, we'll talk about that later, and these work a little bit differently. The new form of serums are called primers, and if they have a type, they will point you at that category, but they don't actually give you the generic nutrients, so they will not cause you to mutate. Mutagenic serum has been renamed to Mutagen Catalyst, which contains a lot of generic mutagen nutrients, so it will cause you to mutate, and it will do it a lot. Does that make sense? Hopefully this makes sense. And although I don't really expect this to come up very much, it is possible to take too much mutagen. If you have too high of an amount of these nutrients in your system, it can cause some problems. I'm not 100% on what all this will do in the future, but at the moment it seems to at least cause you periodic damage if you have too many of these nutrients in your system. You will also get various effects in your character menu based on the amount of mutagen nutrients in your system. Both the typed mutagen and generic mutagen have things that will appear here. For instance, if I get a bunch of fish mutagen nutrient in my system, I will get an effect that is called fish transformation. This is a handy little display to let you know which direction your mutations are trending. I figure people will be happy to see that. These transformations each seem to have their own effect. Using the example of the fish category, for instance, it makes you more thirsty, presumably because you're becoming a fish, and I've heard that fish are fond of water. I think that the effects of these are mostly very low impact, but it is neat that they're all slightly different. Remember, again, and I'm trying to repeat this because I think people will be confused about it, these types of nutrients, they don't make you mutate. These are just you aiming towards those categories. So getting the fish transformation, all that is saying is, hey, you are aimed at the fish category, so when you mutate in the future, that is where you're likely going to get your mutations from. Now, in order to actually mutate, you need the generic mutagen nutrient, and having those in your system gives you other effects in this effect panel. These seem to only appear when you get a certain amount in your system, and that is actually causing you to mutate. For example, let's take the regular mutagen that you eat. If I eat one chunk of mutagen, I don't get any effects in my character menu. And this is because I ate it, and my body needs to digest it before those nutrients get into my system. Now, if I fast forward a few hours, my body has processed that mutagen, and I now have an effect in the panel called changing. This basically just indicates that I have enough of the generic mutagen nutrient in my system that I could potentially start to mutate. As I said earlier, the serums that we previously had in the game have been renamed. This is because we are going to be getting the addition of other things in the game in the near future that would be better suited with the name serum. So now what was previously the different typed serums are now called primers, like insect primer, cattle primer, etc. And the generic mutagen serum was renamed to Mutagenic Catalyst. This renaming will probably confuse someone, but it does make sense for multiple reasons. Firstly, as I said, serums are going to be something else. If I recall correctly, ERC is working on adding some super soldier style serums to the game. And then the second reason is because with the new system, this naming convention makes a lot more sense. For example, the primers indicate to the player that you are priming your system for that type of transformation. They don't actually make you mutate, they just prepare your body for changes in that direction. The catalyst, however, does make you mutate, so obviously it's the catalyst for your transformation. So even if a new player did not know how this system worked, these names at least hint at what they do. Now, I know this will be an adjustment, everyone hates change, but these are ultimately more clearly named, and it's fine. Now, Purifier has also been reworked to work with these new systems. The standard Purifier works like base level mutagen. It puts Purifier into your system in addition to the generic mutation nutrients that you need to mutate. And this means that you will move towards mutating, and the category you're mutating towards is baseline human. Injectable Purifier works like the other primers in the game. It primes your system towards a category, which would be, returning to be a human, essentially. However, if you use the Injectable Purifier, you're going to still need some generic mutagen nutrients in order to kickstart your mutating. The Injectable Purifier, like the other injectables, it just primes your system to move back towards human. Well, now I hope that was all clear and helpful, although I totally understand if that came across as confusing. I'm not sure that I'm relaying this properly. But let's move on now and say that you have taken some typed mutagen to point your character towards a specific mutation category. Then you took some catalyst or generic mutagen to kickstart the mutation process. So how does the new system determine what mutation you're going to get? Well, for starters, your chances for getting good or bad or neutral mutations has been reworked. Previously, the system used a flat percentage for good or bad mutations, and then there was some allowance for mutations that were 0 points or very neutral, or however we referred to them. However, now the system is dynamic based on your character's genetic instability. What this means is that as you first start mutating, you are very likely to get the good or neutral mutations. However, the more that you mutate, or that you purify your mutations, the more genetically unstable your character will become. As you become more unstable, the chance for bad mutation rises. There's a chart in one of the PRs that shows the percent chances of good versus bad mutations at different levels of instability. And for the purposes of instability, purifying does count as mutating. Gaining or losing a mutation counts for this system. And this is a great time to mention that you shouldn't think of purifying as purifying, you should simply think of it as you mutating back towards human. Purifier is basically just human mutagen. Now you accumulate this instability the more that you mutate, and although there is a cap on it, it would take a fair bit of effort to get towards that cap. Your instability does reduce over time, but it's a very slow decrease. It would take you about 100 days to shrug off a single mutation. The only way that I saw to change this was to have the robust genetics trait. Since the odds of good or bad mutations have now been reworked to be based on your instability, robust genetics does not work the way that it used to. Instead, this significantly increases the rate at which you lose instability, meaning that ultimately it still does impact your chances of good versus bad mutations. In the comments of this PR, Miley also said that in the future there may be rare loot in the game that can also change the rate at which you lose instability. So I do want to stress this. I saw some people irritated that robust genetics, quote, doesn't do anything now. That's simply not true. It is still a valuable trait, and it still leads to you ultimately having more positive mutations than negative. In order to shrug off the instability from mutating, a normal character would have to wait 100 days. If you have robust genetics, this takes 4 days. And since low instability means you have a higher chance of getting positive mutations, yeah, I would say that that's still pretty valuable. I just wanted to stress this since that's a point that I have seen some people complaining about. However, your genetic instability is not the only factor in what mutation you will get. As your character consumes mutagen or mutagenic catalyst, they'll begin building up those nutrients in their system, which will lead to mutation, as we discussed previously. Coming in again as the editor, I did misspeak in this video. Now originally, I had stated that mutations each had a point cost assigned to them. Their point cost would drain that amount of mutagen nutrient from your system when they occurred, and if you did not have enough nutrient in your system, you would not be eligible to get those mutations. However, this was incorrect. Currently, all mutations that do have a cost are set to 100. In the future, however, possibly in the very near future, these values are going to be rebalanced. This means that in the future, it may cost more mutagen nutrient to get larger or more obtrusive mutations. So for example, mutating and becoming huge is a large change to your body and may require a lot of nutrient to be in your system. However, something like a beak might require a lot less since it's a very small change. The other aspect of these point costs is that this will probably mean that there will be some amount of imbalance between the different categories. In other words, it might take more points to go into slime mutations than it would to go into cattle. Now those are just arbitrary examples. I don't know that that's true, but that was the thought I had while looking over this. Also, just to touch here on thresholds, which I didn't talk about at all in my original recording, they have changed slightly as well. As of right now, crossing a threshold does require you to have a certain amount of typed nutrient in your system. They require you to have at least 2200 or more of the typed nutrient in your system, obviously the one that you're shooting for to cross the threshold. Now this is technically possible to be obtained in a single dose of the primer, but it's on the high end and requires you to get a little lucky with the random roll. More likely though, you will combine a dose of primer with a dose or two of the edible type of mutagen to get those levels in your system. When you do cross the threshold, they have a cost of 1500, which basically just means that the levels of that type of nutrient in your system will drop significantly after you cross the threshold. I don't know how much this really matters though, since at that point you've crossed the threshold, which was probably your goal in the first place. And additionally, remember that the nutrients leave your body pretty slowly, so you don't have to take a large quantity of typed mutagen or primers in rapid succession. It would be totally fine to spread it out over a couple of days or a week if you had to. Although I say that, I don't really know why you would have to wait, but do remember that you can also OD on mutagen, so you don't want to take way too much. And again, taking too much and getting into that state would lead to ongoing damage to your torso, which, spoiler alert, you probably don't want that. And regardless, that's really all I know about thresholds at the moment. And I think that actually might be it for the system, or at least that is enough information, I think, for you to start playing with the system, hopefully. I really did struggle with how to relay this to you. I feel like the whole episode sounds confusing as hell. I'm hoping once I put some graphics on the screen, it'll make a little bit more sense. But anyway, let's move on to my opinion now, I guess. I think that these are mostly pretty much exclusively good changes. I have seen some pushback from players about the system. Now, usually when I see people complain about things, I can sort of see where they're coming from. Now, most of the time, I mean, some people are just psychotic and hateful about everything, but a lot of times there's some little kernel of truth in what they're saying where I can at least understand where they're coming from. However, with these changes, I don't really see where your complaints are coming from. This seems like a well thought out system, and there are more changes for mutations coming in the future that I think will make it even better. I understand that people don't like change, and I understand that you maybe don't like that you can't instantly mutate anymore. But also, I mean, if you take Mutagen, you still seem to mutate within 24 hours or so, at least to start with. So it's not even really a delay in your mutation. And I've seen people complaining about the change to robust genetics hurting players and making it harder to get good mutations, which is just flatly false. Not only are you more likely to get positive mutations overall just from the nature of the system, but robust genetics also keeps you lower on that chart, meaning that you're even more likely to get positive mutations. So I don't see a lot of reason to be mad here, other than simply because it's different and you don't want it to be different. Now, Miley has also been working on some follow-up things for mutations. I'm not sure how public they want it to be, and I haven't seen a lot of detail on it, so mostly I'm going to be vague here. But in the future, the different mutation trees may become more distinct. For instance, maybe beast mutants get access to a special martial art just for that type of mutant. And again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, but I like the idea of having each one of them have benefits and drawbacks in terms of gameplay, not just in terms of like stat changes and traits. And with those thoughts though, I think that that's the end of this video. Hopefully this was not confusing. I'm very worried that this will be confusing. Hopefully by now you understand the foundations of this new system. Shoutouts to Miley for all the work that they did putting all of this together. And I know that some of you will be mad that I didn't provide exact numbers for mutations and traits and the min-maxy stuff, but also I don't really care. I'm not about that life. So thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this helped you out, and I'll be back with more in the near future, so I'll see you next time.